Pebble Beach Auto Auction is getting underway, and the iconic car from the 80s, is center stage.
The famous Ferris Bueller Ferrari, an actual car used in the movie, is about to be sold for an estimated $250,000 to $1 million. But here's the catch. It's not really a Ferrari.
You might think barn finds are just legends. So did a French family, until they uncovered $50 million in rusted treasure. See, their grandfather, Roger Baillon, had tried to build a museum that never opened. And now his secret collection is rewriting automotive history. One Ferrari started it all. Then came more. Scrapyards in Los Angeles, warehouses in the Netherlands, secrets surfacing everywhere. This is no coincidence. It's a global unraveling. And this isn't just about collectors. Ordinary people are uncovering extraordinary history. And now, the very companies that let it disappear are racing to reclaim it. But why? Why are automakers suddenly hunting their own ghosts? What else is quietly waiting to explode in value? Keep watching, because the next great discovery might not be behind a velvet rope. It might be behind your neighbor's garage. The museum that never was. Now, understanding Roger Bayon means understanding the optimism of post-war France. This was a man who looked at the automotive industry's rapid evolution and saw opportunity. While others were buying cars to drive, Roger was acquiring them to preserve. His vision was grand. Create a museum that would showcase automotive history for future generations. Reality proved more challenging than vision. Operating expenses accumulated faster than revenue projections suggested they would. The 1970s brought economic uncertainty that made cultural investments seem less practical. When Roger's shipping business faced difficulties, hard choices became unavoidable. The museum project stalled, then stopped entirely. Rather than sell everything immediately, Roger made a decision that would ultimately prove brilliant. Store the collection and wait for better times. He sold approximately 50 vehicles to stabilize his finances, then moved the remaining 60 to various locations on his property. These were not climate-controlled facilities or professional storage arrangements. Nature began reclaiming some vehicles while mysteriously preserving others. When Roger died, his son Jacques inherited both the property and its automotive secrets. Jacques passed away before making any decisions about the collection's future, leaving his children to inherit grandfather's dream alongside its associated responsibilities. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, another family was sitting on an equally shocking secret that nobody suspected: the junkyard empire. Behind razor wire in Los Angeles, Rudy Klein spent 40 years building what looked like a scrapyard until someone realized it contained more automotive treasure than most museums. Rudy Klein represented a completely different approach to automotive collecting. Where Roger Bayon dreamed of museums and cultural preservation, Klein operated from pure passion, mixed with shrewd business instinct. His Los Angeles facility appeared to outsiders like exactly what it claimed to be: Porsche foreign auto wrecking. The appearance was deliberately misleading. Klein understood that the best way to preserve automotive treasures was to make them invisible to thieves and tax assessors. Behind steel fencing and razor wire, protected by the assumption that junkyards contain junk, Klein methodically assembled one of America's most significant collections of European automotive exotica. Klein's background gave him unique advantages in building his empire. As a German immigrant with deep mechanical knowledge, he could evaluate vehicles that others dismissed as worthless. The Lamborghini Miuras alone represented millions in potential value. Klein had acquired multiple examples over the decade, each with its own story of accident, abandonment, or manufacturer disinterest. When Klein died in 2001, his family inherited more than a business. They inherited responsibility for preserving automotive history that existed nowhere else. Professional evaluators began arriving at the facility, and their initial assessments suggested Klein's apparent junkyard contained treasures that would soon reshape understanding of what American collectors had been quietly accumulating. The numbers were about to get even more shocking than anyone imagined. The auction earthquake, February 6, 2015, the day the collector car world watched 50 years of hidden automotive history cross the auction block in 11 hours. The Art Curial auction house had handled significant automotive sales before, but nothing approached the scale or significance of the Bayon collection. 60 vehicles spanning multiple decades of European automotive artistry, all emerging simultaneously from decades of hidden storage. The star of the sale was undoubtedly the 1961 Ferrari 250 GT SWB California Spider. This was not just any California Spider. This was chassis number 2935 GT, a vehicle that had existed as rumor among collectors. Originally exhibited at the 1961 Paris Motor Show, owned by a movie star, then disappeared into Roger Bayon's collection. When the hammer fell, the California Spider had achieved 16.3 million euros, establishing a new world record for the model and sending shockwaves through the international collector community. 10 different world records were established that day, proving that barn find premiums could exceed even optimistic projections. The psychological impact extended far beyond individual sale prices. Watching 60 significant vehicles emerge simultaneously forced collectors worldwide to reconsider assumptions about scarcity and market stability. International media coverage brought barn find fever to mainstream attention. Suddenly, everyone with a grandmother's garage or a rural property began wondering if they might be sitting on automotive gold. The collector car community realized that their carefully managed market could be disrupted at any moment by discoveries that nobody saw coming. The ripple effects were just beginning to spread across the global collector car community, and the next discoveries would prove even more shocking. Look, we mapped the ripple effects from one barn in France to car markets worldwide. That's hours of digging condensed into a few clear takeaways. If you're learning something new here, a quick sub or comment goes a long way. The Hidden Empire. In the Netherlands, a completely different kind of collection was quietly taking shape, one that even close friends never suspected. Ad Palmen, a vintage car dealer based in Dordrecht, spent 4 decades assembling over 230 cars without telling anyone. Palmen's method was subtle but systematic. While operating his public-facing dealership, he privately stashed away select vehicles across 3 separate buildings near Rotterdam. The brands represented were a who's who of European prestige: Ferrari, Lancia, Mercedes-Benz, BMW, Volkswagen, and more. His yellow Lancia B20, acquired in the early 1980s, remained one of the longest stored examples in the entire collection. Unlike the Bayon fleet, these vehicles were not exposed to rain or vegetation. Palmen had used his resources to shelter them well, preserving originality without full restoration. It was a collector's archive frozen in time, layers of dust over perfectly aligned rows of rare vehicles. When Palmen passed away, his estate contacted Gallery Aldering to help evaluate and sell the contents. What they found defied every expectation. The volume was immense. The logistics of inventorying, valuing, and marketing this collection posed a threat to market equilibrium. Suddenly, everyone in the European collector space faced the same uncomfortable question. If one man could quietly own this many vehicles, how many others had done the same? As appraisers scrambled to assess Palmen's estate, another discovery across the Atlantic was about to expose a different risk, one that had nothing to do with value and everything to do with truth. The identity crisis. When chassis number 3417 emerged from Rudy Klein's collection, experts noticed something troubling. That same identification number had already appeared on a different Lamborghini Miura sold in Germany in 2006. 2 identical chassis numbers meant someone was wrong. Authenticity is the foundation of value in the collector car world. Without verified identity, even a rare Lamborghini becomes just a beautiful shell. To resolve the conflict, auction house R.M. Sotheby's launched a deep dive investigation involving metallurgists, historians, and forensic documentation specialists. The process was painstaking. They examined weld marks, paint samples, stampings, and factory records. The Miura from Klein's scrapyard had all the signs of early production and unrestored authenticity, yet legal ownership records conflicted with its physical evidence. As the investigation unfolded, it revealed a much larger issue. Barn finds, especially those hidden for decades, often defy official registries. Their existence challenges accepted history, disrupts factory production logs, and undermines confidence in collector car databases. Collectors who had spent years validating their investments grew anxious. If 2 identical cars could exist under the same identity, how many others were floating in ambiguity? It wasn't just about one Miura anymore. It was about the fragility of a system built on documentation that assumed perfection, but never accounted for discovery. While experts debated chassis numbers, a different kind of challenge was unfolding in the restoration bay, where each decision could add or erase millions in value. The restoration gamble. Restoring the Ferrari 250 GT California Spider from the Bayon collection was no ordinary task. After decades of exposure to moisture, grime, and corrosion, every part of the vehicle needed attention, but none could be casually replaced. This wasn't restoration, it was conservation fused with surgery. Every nut, every bolt, every rusted panel had to be evaluated not just for function, but for its historical integrity. The V12 engine had seized decades earlier, and reviving it required decisions that could never be reversed. Do you rebuild a seized engine using new parts and risk losing its originality? Or do you leave it untouched and accept that it may never run again? Craftsmen faced such questions daily, knowing each answer could raise or drop the car's value by millions. Even the paint became an archaeological site. Faded layers were studied with chemical analysis to identify the exact pigment mix used by Ferrari in 1961. The bodywork demanded precision repairs that maintained its original lines while reinforcing compromised structures. The restoration took over 3 years. Specialists from across Europe contributed, some preserving metal, others reviving upholstery, still others decoding mechanical systems long out of production. This was not about making something look new. It was about bringing a legend back without erasing its scars. The process drew global attention. While the Ferrari came back to life, new eyes turned toward hidden barns and satellite imagery, hoping to find the next untouched legend. The hunt awakens. Henry Ruggeri's estate stunned experts, not because of what was found, but how it had been hidden. Spread across 5 rural locations in France, 81 rare vehicles emerged from barns, fields, and sheds, each deliberately disabled to deter theft but kept whole for future resurrection. Ruggeri had created a system. He disconnected key parts, removed distributors, drained fluids, ensuring none of the cars could be easily taken, but all could be restored. Among them was a Lamborghini Miura P400, showing nearly 78,000 kilometers. It had been resting peacefully, preserved by absence. This discovery kicked off a new wave of barn find fever. Only now it wasn't about stumbling upon greatness. It was about actively hunting it. With the rise of online maps, registration records, and social media forums, hobbyists became digital archaeologists. Communities formed around locating potential storage spots based on building shapes, old dealership records, and obituary notices of known collectors. What once required luck now required data, patience, and collaboration. Satellite imagery exposed potential garages in rural regions. Drones confirmed building contents. Entire teams coordinated site visits through estate lawyers and historical property records. The age of discovery had entered its next phase, not accidental but methodical. As searchers grew more organized, technology would become their sharpest tool, transforming individuals with laptops into professional-grade treasure hunters. Digital archaeology. The satellite image was unmistakable. Something large and automotive was hiding beneath that corrugated roof in rural France. Technology revolutionized automotive archaeology in ways that traditional treasure hunters never anticipated. High-resolution satellite imagery, available through consumer mapping services, suddenly gave amateur researchers capabilities that previously required government-level resources. Dedicated barn find hunters learned to identify visual signatures that suggested automotive storage. Ryan Brute, known as the auto archaeologist, pioneered systematic approaches to digital treasure hunting. Rather than relying on chance encounters or local rumors, Brute developed methodologies that combined historical research, social media investigation, and technological surveillance to locate forgotten automotive collections. His success rate demonstrated that passionate amateurs could compete with professional dealers in finding significant discoveries. Social media platforms became unexpected tools for automotive archaeology. Facebook groups dedicated to barn finds attracted thousands of members who shared leads, coordinated searches, and collaborated on research projects. Online estate sale platforms revealed another treasure hunting opportunity. Families liquidating properties often included automotive items without understanding their significance. Experienced hunters learned to recognize subtle clues in estate sale photographs. Property record analysis became sophisticated detective work. Researchers learned to identify ownership patterns that suggested automotive collecting. Properties purchased by enthusiasts during specific decades, estate transfers following collector deaths, or commercial properties converted to private storage. Modern hunters faced competition from corporate interests that recognized barn find potential. Classic car dealerships began employing systematic search methods, using professional resources to identify and acquire discoveries before amateur hunters could act. The implications went far beyond individual discoveries, fundamentally changing how the collector car community understood scarcity and market dynamics. Market disruption. When 60 rare cars enter the market simultaneously, something has to give, and it is usually the values of every similar car on Earth. The Baillon collection auction created the first documented case of barn find market disruption on a global scale. 60 vehicles entering the collector market simultaneously forced immediate recalculation of supply assumptions that had supported price stability. Collectors who owned similar vehicles watched their investment values fluctuate based on discoveries they could not predict or control. Ferrari California Spiders provided the clearest example of market impact. Before the Baillon auction, fewer than 50 examples were known to exist, supporting valuations based on extreme scarcity. The sudden appearance of an additional, exceptionally original example forced immediate revaluation of every other California Spider in existence. Insurance companies struggled to adapt valuation models that could not account for unpredictable supply increases. Professional dealers faced strategic dilemmas about inventory management and client advice. Should they recommend immediate sale before potential discoveries crashed values, or counsel patience while markets absorbed new supply? Regional markets responded differently to barn find disruption. European collectors familiar with discovery stories and restoration culture showed greater acceptance of market volatility. American collectors, accustomed to more stable appreciation patterns, reacted with increased caution about high-value purchases. The psychological impact extended beyond immediate financial concerns. Collectors began questioning fundamental assumptions about automotive rarity and market stability. Investment advisors, specializing in collector cars, developed new portfolio strategies that acknowledged barn find risk. Market timing around major discoveries created opportunities for informed participants while disadvantaging casual collectors. The cultural implications were becoming impossible to ignore as traditional collecting philosophy confronted modern market realities. Preservation versus restoration. The debate split the automotive world. Should barn finds be restored to perfection or preserved exactly as discovered? Traditional collector car culture emphasized restoration to original factory specifications, viewing mechanical and cosmetic perfection as the ultimate achievement. Concours d'Elegance competitions rewarded vehicles that appeared exactly as they had when new, celebrating craftsmanship and attention to detail that erased any evidence of aging or use. Barn finds challenged this philosophy by presenting vehicles whose authenticity lay precisely in their unrestored condition. The Ferrari California Spider from the Bayon collection became a philosophical battleground. Restoration to concours standards would require replacing nearly every component, creating a vehicle that looked perfect but contained minimal original material. Preservation of its barn find condition maintained historical authenticity while limiting functional capability and aesthetic appeal. Museum professionals argued for preservation approaches that documented vehicles exactly as discovered. The patina, oxidation, and deterioration represented 50 years of automotive history that restoration would destroy forever. Restoration specialists countered that vehicles were designed to function, not simply exist as historical artifacts. A Ferrari that could not run failed to fulfill its fundamental purpose, regardless of historical significance. Financial considerations complicated philosophical debates. Perfectly restored vehicles typically achieved higher auction prices than preserved barn finds, creating economic pressure for restoration regardless of historical arguments. Generational differences influenced preservation versus restoration attitudes. Older collectors, raised in traditional restoration culture, valued perfection and function over historical authenticity. Younger enthusiasts, influenced by preservation movements in other collecting fields, appreciated originality and character over cosmetic perfection. Corporate interests were beginning to take notice of barn find discoveries, introducing new dynamics that would reshape the entire collector car landscape. The heritage race. When Mercedes-Benz heard about concept cars appearing in Atlanta junkyards, they realized they needed to act fast. The discovery of a Mercedes MBX concept exhibit in an Atlanta recycling center represented a new category of automotive archaeology. corporate heritage recovery. This was not a classic car from decades past, but a recent concept vehicle that had somehow escaped corporate control and ended up abandoned among industrial waste. Major automotive manufacturers began developing heritage recovery programs designed to reclaim corporate history before it disappeared into private collections or scrapyards. BMW, Mercedes-Benz, Ferrari, and other premium brands recognized that concept cars, prototypes, and experimental vehicles represented intellectual property and marketing assets that justified systematic recovery efforts. Corporate heritage programs operated with resources that individual collectors could not match. Manufacturers could fund global search operations, employ teams of researchers, and offer acquisition budgets that overwhelmed private competition. When Ferrari decided to recover prototype vehicles, they brought corporate determination and unlimited funding to treasure hunting activities. The competition between corporate and private collectors created tension in the barn find community. Traditional treasure hunters felt displaced by corporate teams that could outbid, out-research, and out-negotiate amateur enthusiasts. Legal complications emerged when manufacturers claimed ownership of vehicles they had abandoned decades earlier. Corporate lawyers argued that concept cars and prototypes remained intellectual property, regardless of how they had been acquired by private parties. Private collectors adapted by focusing on vehicles that corporations could not claim. Production cars, racing vehicles owned by private teams, and custom builds that represented individual rather than corporate creativity. The hobby evolved to avoid direct competition with corporate heritage programs. The future of automotive passion was hanging in the balance, as these corporate interventions reshaped fundamental aspects of collector car culture and accessibility. The insurance apocalypse. How do you insure a car that officially does not exist until someone finds it in a barn and it is suddenly worth $18 million? Lloyd's of London, the institution that had insured everything from oil tankers to space missions, faced their most challenging automotive puzzle yet. Traditional insurance models relied on predictable depreciation curves, established market values, and controlled supply dynamics. Barn finds destroyed every assumption that made collector car insurance mathematically possible. The California Spider's $18 million valuation created immediate coverage crises across the insurance industry. Existing policies on similar vehicles suddenly faced exposure calculations that exceeded entire company reserves. How could insurers protect against losses when identical vehicles might emerge from storage at any moment, instantly devaluing their covered assets? Risk assessment became impossible when supply could not be predicted. Insurance companies traditionally calculated premiums based on historical data, showing gradual appreciation and stable market conditions. The barn find phenomenon introduced chaos variables that made actuarial science ineffective. Premium calculations reflected industry uncertainty through dramatic price increases that priced middle-class collectors out of coverage entirely. Specialized barn find insurance emerged as a niche market serving discovery stakeholders. Policies covered authentication costs, restoration expenses, and legal fees associated with provenance disputes. Self-insurance gained popularity among collectors who could no longer obtain commercial coverage at reasonable costs. Government intervention became inevitable when insurance market failure threatened cultural preservation. Several European countries developed state-backed insurance programs for automotive heritage, recognizing that private markets could not handle barn find volatility. A new generation was approaching these discoveries differently, developing solutions that traditional collectors never imagined possible. Digital natives. When 25-year-old tech entrepreneur Marcus Chen bought the rusted Lamborghini Miura, he had no intention of restoring it. Chen represented a fundamental shift in automotive appreciation that older collectors struggled to understand. Rather than viewing the deteriorated Miura as a restoration project, he saw it as a historical artifact whose value lay precisely in its unrestored condition. His purchase strategy involved digital documentation, virtual reality capture, and blockchain authentication rather than traditional mechanical restoration. Younger collectors embraced preservation philosophy that treated barn finds as time capsules rather than restoration projects. They invested in advanced photography, three-dimensional scanning, and digital archiving to capture every detail of vehicles exactly as discovered. The goal was not returning cars to factory condition, but preserving evidence of their journey through decades of storage. Technology enabled new forms of automotive ownership that divorced appreciation from physical possession. Virtual reality systems allowed enthusiasts to experience barn-find vehicles in detail impossible through traditional viewing. Digital twins created interactive representations that preserved vehicle character while enabling global access without risking physical damage. Social media transformed barn-find appreciation from private enjoyment to community experience. Young collectors shared discovery stories, documentation processes, and preservation techniques through platforms that reached global audiences. Educational initiatives emerged from digital native communities seeking to preserve automotive knowledge for future generations. Environmental consciousness influenced preservation approaches among younger collectors who questioned the sustainability of traditional restoration practices. The generational divide created tension between preservation and restoration philosophies that reflected broader cultural differences about consumption, ownership, and historical preservation. Communities were finding their own solutions that bridged generational differences while maintaining automotive passion for diverse participants. Democratic access, the solution was not about who could afford to own these discoveries. It was about making sure everyone could experience them. Community preservation initiatives emerged as alternatives to individual ownership that had become economically impossible for most enthusiasts. Local automotive heritage groups developed cooperative ownership models that shared costs while ensuring public access to significant vehicles. These programs demonstrated that automotive passion could survive economic displacement through collaborative approaches. The Concours d'Elegance at Pebble Beach partnered with barn-find preservation groups to create rotating exhibitions that brought unrestored discoveries to public attention, rather than focusing exclusively on perfectly restored vehicles. These events celebrated historical authenticity and preservation philosophy that barn finds represented. Educational partnerships between collectors and museums created sustainable models for heritage preservation that served multiple community interests. Private collectors gained professional storage and conservation support, while museums acquired exhibition content and educational opportunities. Technology democratized automotive heritage through virtual reality experiences that provided intimate access to vehicles that physical viewing could not match. Documentation projects created lasting value from barn-find discoveries, regardless of eventual disposition. Community volunteers systematically recorded vehicle specifications, historical context, and technical details that preserved knowledge even when physical vehicles faced uncertain futures. International coordination enabled expertise sharing across geographic boundaries that had traditionally isolated automotive community. Corporate sponsorship provided funding for community preservation initiatives that generated positive publicity while supporting genuine heritage conservation. Volunteer networks developed around barn-find preservation that engaged passionate individuals regardless of economic resources. Contributors offered research skills, documentation expertise, and labor support that professional restoration could not match in quality or dedication. The most important discovery was still to come, hidden not in dusty garages, but in the collective wisdom of communities working together. The story itself, the greatest treasure hidden in those dusty barns, was not the cars, it was the stories they carried. Roger Bayon's unfulfilled museum dream finally achieved realization through global attention that barn-find discoveries generated. His vision of sharing automotive heritage with future generations succeeded beyond his original imagination, reaching millions of people who learned about automotive history through media coverage of his collection's discovery and sale. Henry Ruggeri's systematic preservation across multiple locations demonstrated community-scale thinking that transcended individual collecting. His method of distributing vehicles while maintaining their integrity showed how passionate individuals could preserve automotive heritage without traditional museum infrastructure. Rudy Klein's junkyard empire proved that automotive passion could survive and thrive in industrial environments that seemed hostile to preservation. What if the real treasure wasn't the cars, but the stories they carried? From Roger Bayon's abandoned dream to Rudy Klein's junkyard empire, these discoveries weren't just about rusted metal. They were about vision, memory, and preserving history without permission. So what do you think matters more, perfection or preservation? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear how you see the future of automotive heritage. And as always, thank you for watching and being part of this story.